She stopped eating, not because she wasn't hungry, but because she was certain her stomach no longer existed. She told her doctor she had no organs, no blood, no soul. She was, she insisted, already dead. Her heart was beating, her lungs were breathing, and yet inside her mind, she did not exist. This condition has a name, and it is one of the most terrifying things a human brain can do to itself. In 1880, a French neurologist named Jules Cotard stood before the Society of Biology in Paris and described a patient unlike any he had ever seen. He called her Case le délire de négation, the delusion of negation. The patient, a middle-aged woman, believed she had no brain, no nerves, no chest, and that she was condemned to live forever in this empty state, unable to die a proper death. Today, that cluster of symptoms carries his name, Cotard's syndrome. It is classified as a nihilistic delusion, a complete unshakable belief that the self, or parts of the self, have ceased to exist. Cases are extraordinarily rare. Fewer than 200 documented cases exist in the entire global medical literature. But those who live through it describe an experience that defies every instinct of being human. Some patients refuse to bathe, believing their body is decaying and bathing a corpse is pointless. Some stop eating entirely, certain their digestive system has rotted away. Some wander into graveyards, convinced they belong there, among the dead. And some, in a devastating paradox, attempt to prove they are immortal by harming themselves, expecting no pain, no blood, and no consequence. What could possibly cause a living, breathing person to reach that conclusion? To understand Cotard's syndrome, you have to understand something remarkable about how the brain constructs the feeling of being alive. Every moment you are conscious, your brain is comparing the sensory signals coming in from your body against a running model of what it expects your body to feel like. When those signals match, you feel real. When they stop matching, something goes deeply, profoundly wrong. Neuroimaging studies of Cotard's patients reveal drastically reduced metabolic activity across large regions of the brain, particularly in the frontal and parietal lobes. In fact, in one landmark study, the scans of Cotard's patients looked strikingly similar to scans taken under general anesthesia. The brain was physically functioning, and yet vast regions responsible for emotional processing were effectively switched off. This has consequences researchers are still untangling. One key structure is the amygdala, the brain's threat detection and emotional response center. In Cotard's patients, the amygdala appears to have become disconnected from the face recognition circuits in the brain. Normally, when you recognize your own face, in a mirror, in a photograph, a wave of familiarity and emotional warmth fires through that circuit. In Cotard's patients, that wave never comes. They see the face, they can describe it, but they feel absolutely nothing, no sense that the face belongs to them. The brain, confronted with this impossible gap between seeing and feeling, reaches for the only explanation it can construct. The body must be dead. Cotard's can emerge from several different triggers. It has appeared after severe depressive episodes, after traumatic brain injuries, after high fevers and encephalitis, brain inflammation. It has appeared as a side effect of certain antiviral medications, including, in documented cases, a drug used to treat herpes called acyclovir. One particularly striking case involved a young man in his 20s who developed Cotard's after a near-fatal motorcycle accident. When he was well enough to speak, he told his mother he was dead and that she had brought him to hell. He was pointing at the hospital around him. He survived. He recovered. But for months, no argument, no evidence, and no amount of love could convince him otherwise. So how do you treat a person who believes they cannot be treated? Because, as far as they are concerned, they are already dead. This is where Cotard's syndrome becomes not just medically fascinating, but genuinely heartbreaking. Psychotherapy alone almost never works. You cannot reason someone out of a belief that their brain is biologically generating. The belief isn't a choice. It isn't a metaphor. It is what the brain's own evidence is telling the patient. The most effective treatments discovered so far are biological, working directly on the brain's chemistry. Antidepressants, particularly those that boost serotonin and norepinephrine, have shown significant success in some cases. Antipsychotic medications have helped stabilize the delusional thinking in others. And in the most severe, treatment-resistant cases, doctors have turned to electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, which passes a carefully controlled electrical current through the brain to trigger a brief therapeutic seizure. Sounds alarming. But in multiple documented Cotard's cases, it produced dramatic remission. Patients emerging from the belief that they had no body, no organs, no self. One woman who had refused food for so long she had to be tube-fed began eating again after ECT. She later described the experience as waking up, not from sleep, but from a kind of death. But not every patient recovers. Some remain trapped in this state for years, and science still does not fully understand why the neural disconnection occurs, why it affects some people and not others, or why, in some cases, it simply resolves on its own. What we do know is this: the experience of being alive, the felt sense of existing, is not something the brain guarantees. It is constructed moment to moment by a network of neural signals that can, under the right, or rather the wrong, conditions, simply stop confirming that you are here. Jules Cotard, the man who first named this condition, died in 1889. He never knew the neurological mechanisms behind what he had observed. He only knew that something had severed his patients from the most fundamental human certainty, the certainty of being alive. More than 140 years later, the disorder still carries his name. The patients who have moved through it and returned describe an almost impossible gratitude for warmth, for hunger, for the small proof that their body is real. Things the rest of us never notice, the weight of our own hands, the pull of a breath, become extraordinary. Cotard's syndrome is a reminder that the self is not a given. It is assembled, quietly and constantly, by a brain working so hard and so automatically that we never once think to be grateful. And somewhere in the world right now, someone is living proof of what happens when it stops.